How old were you exploring drugs, alcohol?
I was 15 years old, was my first love. The person that I was when I was under the influence was the person I wanted to be all the time.
Like, where were you getting the money for all the booze and the drugs and everything?
I stole. One of the things that I'm most ashamed of that sticks out, I took medication from my mother, was undergoing cancer treatment.
All right. We're going to get to all of that in just a moment. But first, I want you to know how grateful I am for today's podcast sponsor, my friends at FitAF Nutrition. They are Eastern Pennsylvania's leading meal prep company. FitAF offers meals of multiple sizes for people with various health goals. And you know what I love about this company? They use high-quality ingredients like grass-fed meats, wild fish, and locally harvested produce. And all right, for you parents on the go, they even offer family meals. Go to fitafnutrition.com, place your order by Thursday at midnight, and get fresh, prepared meals delivered right to your door on Sunday. Use code Leckey at checkout to get 20% off your first order. Here we go, buddy.
It's the Ryan Leckey Show.
Hey, everybody, welcome back. Great to have you on another episode of the Ryan Leckey Show. With me on the couch, the one and only Pat McDonough. He is a mental health therapist who specializes in addiction. We have a lot to unpack today.
We do.
Ryan, are you ready for this?
Thanks for having me. I think so.
All right. And we want to point out you have your master's in
social work.
And how long have you been in this field?
8 years.
8 years. And you have an incredible story yourself about addiction. And I want people to know as well, before we even begin, right, because we are going to talk about sort of this sober movement underway. A lot of people go, dry January, which happens throughout the year for some people. This isn't a podcast to be like, never pick up a glass of wine. So right, we don't want to kind of think this is like a podcast preaching, but I think shining a light on sort of the movement happening with a lot of people, sobriety, mocktails, everything else, and then some. But I want to get into sort of your life so people can kind of hear your backstory. What led you to become a licensed social worker that you said, I'm really going to focus on addiction and mental health?
Yeah, so it was actually, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like, no clue. Growing up, and friends starting to say in high school and early college, I want to be a lawyer, or I want to, work in construction or labor. I want to go into the medical field. Me, it was literally blank. And I actually realized that I wanted to work in this field while I was in a treatment center. I had been to rehab 4 times by the age of 23 years old, and it started to feel natural to me. It started to feel organic, just being in small groups, talking about mental health, talking about stressors, the type of things that make people tick, how people are impacted by life experiences. And I thought, this is something that I could do.
Before we get to your journey of how you got sober and everything, how old were you when you sort of started going down the rabbit hole of exploring drugs, alcohol? How did it all start? Because I want people to know before we're just like, here's a guy who's a mental health therapist and, he doesn't get it, right? You do get it because you've been through the trenches, but how did it all begin?
Yeah, and I would say that, everybody has their own unique story, right? So I think one of the things that I take pride in is I don't pretend to get it fully, even if I've had experiences with addiction, because I know that there are nuances for everybody, right? Whether how they grew up or, just different life experiences they've had. But when I first had a buzz from alcohol, actually, was my first love. I was 15 years old, and it was like, boom, this wave, wave came over. Sunlight, clouds opened. It was like, this is the feeling that I didn't know existed that I've wanted for my whole life. It was like every insecurity, every fear, every doubt, gone. Can't find it.
At 15.
15, yeah. And I was able to somewhat, be what we call like a weekend warrior throughout high school. I didn't take alcohol use beyond the weekends. I wasn't drinking during the week. I was, getting up, going to school. But I had a pretty structured life. You know, I had a family that was very involved in my life. So had I been in different circumstances, I think it actually would have escalated a lot sooner than it did. But I was lucky to be in a good community and a good family. However, I still faced consequences. I think I was arrested or picked up by the cops maybe 4 times in high school. One thing that I did, which was like out of the norm for me, was I went out for a school play. I went out for the production of Les Miserables at Scranton Prep, and I actually got kicked out of the play because I got arrested for drinking. And so the signs were there. And the other signs that were there was I was a blackout drinker, which is one of the more common signs of someone who's a problem drinker, is having blackouts. So age of 16, 17, I'm starting to black out. My tolerance was already going up. You know, when I first started drinking, I would get drunk from maybe 5 light beers, and by the time I'm a senior in high school, it's 10, and then a freshman in college, it's 15 or 20. So it just continued to pile on. And I started to explore with drugs after high school as well. So I loved it. I loved everything about it. The person that I was when I was under the influence in the early days was the person I wanted to be all the time.
Who was that person?
Someone that, didn't have any anxiety, somebody that believed in themselves and, felt like the life of the party. You know, a lot of this is cliche stuff that you hear, but, they're cliches for a reason. Like, they're real. It's really how you feel. And not everybody gets that impact from alcohol or other substances, right? Certain people do, and I'm one of those people. You know, I believe that I was born with this propensity for addiction, and it is in my family, and it's very genetic, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I just felt confident, and I didn't care what people thought. And eventually that turned against me.
You mentioned the drugs started after high school.
Mm-hmm.
So here you're drinking, still getting the high you're looking for, but what were the drugs you started to explore with? And what happened when you started mixing everything together? Yeah.
And the question might be, what weren't the drugs you started to explore with, right? So cocaine was a big one. And the thing with cocaine is it's a stimulant. So, you use coke and you can stay up for hours and hours. And I used to refer to it as the equalizer. It leveled out my drinking. So, if you drink a lot and you start to become more impaired and, it's a sedative. So you start to become drowsier with time and, lose your inhibition. Cocaine would start to level that out where you felt like, you were more sharp, put together. You can continue to drink. So, there were plenty of nights. I was at Temple my sophomore year of college, and my lifestyle was essentially wake up anywhere between noon and 4 p.m., and I would just party all night. I would drink. I wasn't using cocaine every night at that point, but a couple nights a week. I was smoking a lot of pot. I got into Xanax, benzodiazepine, anti-anxiety medication, very strong. And eventually it led into other pills, opiates. I had a fling with for a while, I would say.
And at the time, you say you're going to Temple University.
Well, that didn't last very long.
Because I was going to say, are you going to class if you're waking up at noon, 4?
I should add. No, I counted at one point. I think I went to a total of 7 classes that semester. And here's the thing, like, going to Temple was, I didn't get in there out of high school because, high school, I believe I was capable, but I slacked a lot. This was one of those subtle impacts of my drinking that I didn't know and I couldn't articulate at the time, in my teenage years, was I had very little motivation in other aspects of my life. I had very little discipline, and because so much of my energy went towards partying, even though it was just on the weekends, like, that was my source of fulfillment. That was my source of achievement. So it was like I kind of only cared about that. I got decent enough grades to get by and graduate high school, but I did not think about the future. I did not think about where I would want to be. So I did well enough my freshman year in college to transfer to Temple, which is where I wanted to go. I had this great apartment, and it was kind of look at it like, this is a clean slate. You got this nice place. You're at the school that you want to be at. Here's your opportunity. Everything is in place for you. Now go live your life, be a human being, be a civilized young adult and study. And I completely crashed and burned. And my parents had access to my grades online at that point. So they went in, they looked it up, and they saw that I just had literally zeros across the board. So they came down, and that was actually the first time that I went to an inpatient drug and alcohol rehab center.
While you're in high school, did your parents, anybody notice? I know you have a close family.
Mm-hmm.
Did anyone notice, I think something's up?
Yeah, my dad did.
What did you do, deflect?
Absolutely, yeah. Minimization, rationalization. I would become almost quietly defiant. And that's a common reaction if anybody confronts a substance use disorder, because it's you heard the way I described it before. I loved it so much. It was it made me this person that I wanted to be, that I felt that I had to be. So I did a lot to protect that until it completely took control of me. But I was in denial. But my dad grew up, his father was an alcoholic, and his father ended up getting sober for many years, my grandfather. So my dad was very much aware of alcoholism in our family. He was aware of some of the signs, how someone, how their life may unfold as a heavy drinker. So he saw the signs early, and he would make comments to me about it. I think I was 18 years old. I remember Googling signs of alcoholism, and I just remember seeing 5 things that applied to me, and it's all right, I'm going to close that. No thanks. So I just didn't want to look at it.
For people who are unfamiliar about alcoholism, is it genetic? Is it a disease? How would you describe it?
Yeah, so it was actually classified as a disease in 1956 by the American Medical Association. Basically, there's a lot of criteria, but sometimes I think it's even hard to go by the book, because it could also be used as a means to rationalize why someone isn't a problem drinker, right? The way that we historically look at it is job loss, DUI, relationship loss. And the reality is there's a lot of functional heavy drinking that goes on, and there's a lot of binge drinking. But the main thing when it comes to having a problem with alcohol is continued use despite negative consequences, right? So take me, for example. I fail out of college, clearly because of alcohol, or that clearly played a large role in it. I continue to use alcohol. Problem.
For people who hear all of this, right, I think there might be a stereotype or a misconception. Here's a kid who maybe grew up in a wealthy family and Scranton. Where were you getting the money for all the booze and the drugs and everything? And were there ever conversations, even with your own family, where they're like, man, we gave you too long of a leash?
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So where did it come from? Did you have a job? I always think people often bring that up. How do people afford it? Because drugs aren't cheap, right?
Yeah. It's interesting you're asking me that, because I've had this conversation a lot, and a lot of people don't ask. And I did. I stole credit cards from my family. I guess that was a little bit. Well, I started going to bars when I was 18, 19 years old.
With a fake ID?
Fake ID, yeah, had multiple. I've actually been caught with them a couple times. I've been arrested for it. But so by the time I'm 18, I'm basically 18 and a half, 19. I'm basically going to bars for the majority of my drinking. And I would take, I had a credit card that had my name on it. That was taken away from me shortly after. But I would actually start taking my parents' credit cards. And I would work. I was working for a catering company. I was working like for the city at one point. So I would have various jobs, but mainly it was, funded by me taking from my family. And my parents would catch me. They would be furious. They would try to take steps to prevent it. I would get around that, and I just kept doing it.
At any point, though, did you ever have a light go off? This is what I'm always fascinated by, people who maybe struggle with certain addictions. I know you mentioned about opening up the website and looking at what alcoholism was, and then you're like, I'm going to close that. I mean, did you ever have moments throughout this journey before, you said 4 stints in rehab, that you're like, you know what, I need to change. This really isn't good.
I did. Yeah, for sure.
A lot of those moments.
Yeah. Mainly when I was under the influence. Like, it'd be, say, midnight, and I have, 13 drinks in me. Then I'm willing to talk about it. Then I'm willing to say, I have a problem. I have to change, maybe tomorrow, or, maybe in a few months. When I'm 22, I'll do it. Right? I'm 21 right now. So, and that's the thing, like, it would, when I was under the influence, it would create this illusion, like everything's safe. And the truth. You'll take care of it when you have to. You'll get your life together in other ways starting tomorrow. And then tomorrow would come, and I'm dealing with all those side effects from alcohol withdrawal. And, it just wasn't an honest conversation.
How bad did all this affect your health? Because, you hear stories of people who wreck their liver.
Yeah.
How bad did it get with you with your own health? Or did you finally get out of it maybe just before it all went really south?
Yeah. See, I think I would have had major health issues at a young age if I kept drinking the way that I was. I was basically drinking every night to a point of being drunk, if not blacked out, by the time I'm 19 years old.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, I actually stopped drinking January of 2010, but I didn't get sober fully until 2011. So I stopped drinking shortly. It was about a month after my 22nd birthday. But I was seeing, when I was 19 or 20 years old, and I was seeing a psychiatrist. And I remember he took my blood pressure. And I don't remember what the number was, but I remember him saying to me, you have to really start taking your health seriously. And I mean, my physical health, so I knew I was overweight. I was about 35 pounds heavier than I am right now. I went 5 years without working out at all, no exercise. I ate whatever I wanted. And obviously I was drinking to excess almost every night. But as far as like blood pressure and, your liver, I didn't know about any of that stuff at the time. And the psychiatrist said to me, you don't want to die. And I said to him, we're talking about death? And he says, yeah, because my blood pressure was apparently that bad that, he was that concerned about my physical condition.
What happened in January of 2010? Because you said it was a year until you officially got sober. After that, what was the light bulb that you're like, okay, time to do something about this?
The police, actually. I got pulled over. I got my second DUI. I had my first DUI 4 months prior in September of 2009. And I had already been in rehab once at that point. So I went from Temple University, and then I took a few months off of drinking and went back. And by 2009, 2010, early 2010, I mean, that was the worst my drinking ever was. And other drugs were involved, as I mentioned before. So at that point, it was like everything was, that was probably the most, that was the most I was ever drinking. and I got a second DUI, and I went back to rehab for the second time about 5 days after that.
Second rehab stint.
Second rehab stint.
But it took 4.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I think the other question as a mental health therapist now, who I know you share your stories with patients, and as you really pointed out, sometimes you tell them, hey, I kind of get where you're coming from, but other times you try not to like say, hey, I totally get it.
Right, right.
What fails with rehabs that you would have to go 4 times? Because I think people often, you're not the first person.
Sure. Yeah.
Is it the rehab? Is it the person? Like, where's the disconnect?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's the rehab, though I would say that some are better than others. But I really believe it's one of those things that, like, you get out of it what you put into it. So it might not be, it's not a fair comparison, but like you think about, you know, you could go to a very low level, very little equipment, say gym, right? I could go to the greatest gym that exists with equipment and trainers, but what does it come down to? It comes down to what we put into it, right? What we're willing to take, how far we're willing to go, how honest we're willing to be with ourselves. And that's what it was for me. I will say that I was highly motivated when I first went into treatment that second time. I was highly motivated. I felt like I was done. Some of it did stick. I didn't go back to drinking, right? I just wasn't ready to be fully sober. And
what does not fully sober look like?
So for me, I'm abstinent. I don't use any mood or mind altering substance. You know, I don't smoke pot, and, you know, that's my journey. Recovery has, I would say, changed a lot over the years. Like when I first went to rehab, I remember one of the nurses told me, because I was prescribed an antidepressant at the time, one of the nurses at the facility told me that wasn't sober, which, you know, is preposterous in my opinion to say that being on an antidepressant isn't sober. But that's how sort of like hardcore it was years ago, was if you're not abstinent, then, you know, you're using and you're doing the wrong thing. And it was kind of a mentality like that. But for me, I am abstinent, and at the time I had stopped drinking, but I started smoking pot again after 6 months. So I was 6 months completely sober. 6 months in, I start using pot. Then I start taking Xanax.
Did you think you could do it and just be like, just a little bit?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
a lot of people, right?
Absolutely.
Let me just dip my toes in. I can handle it. I'm in control.
Yeah, and Ryan, I tell you, this is the scary thing about addiction. Like, the things that I had told you about my story so far, kind of just scratching the surface, right? And I know I casually mentioned 2 DUIs and failing out of school, but, like, you know, I'm not really getting into the day-to-day. Like, it was bad.
What was the dumbest thing you ever did?
Dumbest thing. Oh, God. Probably, yeah, I don't know that I would say dumbest, but one of the things that I'm most ashamed of that sticks out is I took medication from my mother, who was undergoing cancer treatment at the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think what's crazy to hear about your story, we've known each other in northeastern Pennsylvania probably for about a decade from the gym scene.
Yeah.
But to hear sort of what rock bottom looked like for you and where you've come, I think is really impressive. And I think it gives people a lot of hope. If you look at all of this, so it was 2011 when you officially got sober.
2011. Yep. July 2011.
How did your life change after that?
I feel like I've lived 3 lives at this point. I mean, no comparison. Because I wasn't functional in active addiction, right? So, and I wasn't honest, and I was all over the place mentally. You know, my mood was rarely stable. So I was just so unpredictable and chaotic, and, you know, that all that all just kind of went away. Like you said before we went on here, you know, you mentioned the gym we went to, we had nicknames, and, you know, what was my nickname?
Your nickname was Chill.
Yeah.
Everybody's
Chill.
like, he's always chill.
Chill. I was not always chill, though. I was not always chill. And I...
In case you're wondering, mine was Honey Badger, by the way. Honey Badger.
Honey Badger.
But you were chill. That's what they called you. Chill.
Yeah.
Because you were. I mean, there'd be crazy workouts, and we'd all be on, like, pre-workout, or you'd have a coffee before you come in, and we're like, yeah, I'm going to kill it, you know? And then Pat was like, okay, I got this.
Yeah, exactly. But...
that wasn't always you.
No, that was not always me. And, you know, part of my fear in getting sober was, like, I was afraid of who I was without substances. I was afraid of who I was at my core. And so there was an emotional side to it, and then there was sort of like a daily activity side to it, right? So I had to figure out, like, where I was going with my life. And as I mentioned before, it was my last time in treatment that I decided that, hey, I might really want to pursue working in this field. Now, like, a part of me thought I could do that. And there was another part of me that was like, what, are you insane? You just were at your 4th facility in 4 years. You're 23 years old. You're sober for a couple weeks. But that was what I set out to do.
What do you think took the 4th time? Where you finally got sober?
It's weird. It's weird because there was a lot of things that happened leading up to that day that I really snapped. And there was an intervention that my family had that I actually didn't remember. Someone mentioned it about a year afterwards, and I said, what are you talking about? I was so inebriated on prescription medication, pills, that I did not remember this intervention even happening. And I had lost a relationship, you know, one that I really didn't think I was going to lose. And I had friends that I partied with that, like, stopped taking my calls. Like, I remember going to this apartment that we all used to hang out at, and I saw everybody's cars. I'm like, oh, yeah, they're there. Let me go in. And I knock on the door. This was after they hadn't been answering my calls. And nobody comes to the door. Door's locked. And that was a moment for me of, like, my friends that some of them engage in some of the same things that I do, maybe not to my extent, but they don't want to hang out with me anymore, right?
Because you're not Party Pat.
Well,
right?
No.
Okay.
I was at the time.
Okay.
I was at the time.
But it was that extreme.
It was that extreme, yeah. Yeah, it was just that ridiculous. So there were moments like that, you know. I think in this journey for everybody, there's a lot of seeds that get planted along the way, right? Like, we always look for that aha moment, but really there's a lot of little ones that happened along the way for me. And so I woke up one morning after a really bad weekend where I got sick and I was in withdrawal, and I ended up just sleeping, you know, once I was over, like, the bad sickness, I ended up sleeping for about basically 36 hours. And I woke up on a Monday morning, and it was just like, you know, I'm supposed to be going to work right now. I'm supposed to be, you know, I should be enjoying the sun, the outdoors. And I was just so drained and so depressed and scared.
People who go down that road, sometimes it leads to suicide. Did you ever have those thoughts?
I wouldn't say active. I would say more passive, where I would go to bed at night, like, knowing I was going to pass out, and I was intoxicated, and I would think, like, I don't care if I wake up, or, you know, I'd like to just sleep for 2 weeks or something. I just want to wake up in 2 weeks, and I want everything to be completely different. So, you know, never a plan. Nothing consistent, but I had plenty of nights where I'd go to sleep thinking that way. But so basically, all those seeds, you know, losing relationships, people not wanting to hang out with me, physically, it's starting to take more of a toll. And it just so happened that day that I woke up, and I kind of was already thinking, like, I got to stop. I have to be done. My father confronted me. There was something, I don't even know what had happened, but he confronted me about my recent behavior, and I literally put my hands up. I started crying, and I said, I'm done. And he kind of looked at me like half shocked, half pissed. I think he wanted to believe me, but, you know, who could believe me at that point? I lied so much.
So you eventually, I mean, if you fast forward, you go to the 4th stint in rehab.
Mm-hmm.
It takes because you were ready to do the work.
I was ready.
And
I
then
was.
you did say when you were kind of coming out of it, you're thinking, I should go into this field, right?
Yes.
When did you eventually say, because you were even questioning that, saying, hey, I'm going to be a mental health therapist, right? You know,
Yeah.
currently you're a licensed social worker.
Yeah.
So what was the aha moment that said, I could do this and I can help people?
Well, I started to, the aha moment, small group in my last treatment center, psychotherapy group. And actually one of the counselors there had asked me after one of the groups, he pulled me aside and he said, did you graduate college? I said, no. I said, I have about 50 credits, which was what I had at the time, but I want to go back. And he said, you know, you have a great understanding of addiction. I said, well, yeah, I've been in rehab, you know, four times in this is my 4th in the last couple of years here. So like that was my story and other people's stories in treatment centers. Like that was my education. And, you know, then I went and got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree eventually, but that was my foundational education for this. And so that conversation with that counselor, I'll never forget it. It did a lot to kind of boost my confidence, because it's like, it's not only me that sees something, someone else sees that I might have potential in this field. But it was a slow process. When I got out of treatment, you know, I couldn't go right into working there. I had to, you know, be sober for a while, and I had to get some education. So, and I didn't even go right back to school. I worked for about a year and a half, I want to say. And then when I went back to school, I did it slowly. I did 2 classes, 6 credits the first semester. Then I did 6 again. Then I did like 9 over a summer. And it was that 4th semester that I took a full schedule. And about 6 months after graduating, I went into graduate school. While working, I got a job at an inpatient treatment center, the same one that I went to. I got a job as a primary counselor after getting my bachelor's. And then I started graduate school part-time.
You didn't hold back at all sharing your story here. When you shared it with people going through rehab, is there, do you think, a better connection with people and more relatability where they're like, okay, I feel like this guy gets me, and you're sort of making your mess your message?
Right. Yeah. Mess your message. I like that. Yeah, I think it helps people a lot. Because one of the biggest struggles with addiction is the stigma, right? Is this fear of judgment, this fear that other people don't get it. A frustration comes with that as well, where like I'm going through this, you know, psychological torture, physical torture, and nobody else knows what this is like. So yeah, I would say that it helps a lot. And it's something that you hear people say a lot. I think it could be at times actually a little bit unfair to some of the professionals that don't have that lived addiction experience, because there are incredible professionals out there that don't have lived addiction experience that are great providers for people with substance use disorder. But no doubt there's that opportunity for a little bit more of a connection and a little bit more comfort in the therapeutic process with my story.
And when we think, you mention addiction, right? So when we kind of pull back the curtain on that, are there certain statistics that qualify like this is a problem, right? Because I think a lot of people might say, you know, I don't know, I drink twice a month, but when I drink, it's 4 bottles of wine at a time, right?
Yeah.
So what's the boundary? I mean, if people, I guess, when do people know if they have an issue or something that maybe this is more than just a casual drink?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, to try to put it kind of plainly, the first thing I would say is intoxication, right? Like if you're getting intoxicated, if your, speech is slurred, or even you're acting significantly different than you normally might, whether that's like getting louder, passing out, saying things you wouldn't normally say, that is criteria. If you're having withdrawal symptoms, right? If you're having bad hangovers, if you're having significant amounts of anxiety, depression the next day, if you have a little tremor, highly dehydrated, like the more you withdraw, the more likely you are to have a problem. I mentioned earlier, continued use despite negative consequences, right? So something bad happens on Saturday, but the next weekend you're out doing the same thing. Then that's that inability to look at that and to dial back or stop is a sign of a problem. Social impairment, occupational impairment, issues with relationships, issues with the jobs, tolerance. So one of the things I had said earlier was I would get drunk 5 light beers like early on.
I remember you said high school and then college it was 10. And
yeah. And really, if I'm being honest, it probably, it got to be more than 10 into college. But yeah, if someone is drinking more than they used to drink, trying to get that desired effect, then, that could be a sign of an issue.
And I think even if people don't hit that point, there's been a lot of discussion. I mean, social media, especially every time January rolls around, and no matter when you're listening to this, there's a big movement in January every year, no matter what it is. And it's 2024 when we're recording this, Dry January. Mm-hmm. And there's also some research and discussion out there that maybe Gen Z, right? They're exploring more of the sober movement and the sober curious, and unpack, why do you think Dry January is becoming a thing? And is it worth doing for people? I mean, if you're, is that the step to take if you're going to cut alcohol out completely, or is it helping people cut back? Because I'm sure people have brought it up to you as a mental health therapist.
Yeah, it's big. And I know people, in my personal life that are doing it this year. And I started to hear more about it last year. Mm-hmm. I think people should, like, to me, I say, why not? But it's interesting what you said about Gen Z and millennials as well, actually. And what I would say is, I think that there are a lot of potential downfalls of this era that we're in right now. The digital age, the social media, cell phones, technology, the amount of information that we have at our disposal, I think can be overwhelming. I think it leads to a lot of comparison and there's just so much information. And, one of the questions you hear nowadays is, can we as people, are we really ready to handle this amount of information, this amount of technology? But one of the great things about it is you find things out and you can gain awareness easily, right? Like I had mentioned that when I was, 20 years old, and I wasn't really aware of some of the health impacts of alcohol. Now, I did have access to the internet. The internet, 16 years ago wasn't anywhere near what it is now, as you know. And now it's like you open Instagram, and even if you, have typed alcohol at some point, looked anything up, like there's a chance you're going to see some content about negative effects of alcohol. And there are now, like I remember 5 years ago, people saying to me, like, is there resources you can give me? Like, are there podcasts you can give me? Even 2 years ago, podcasts people are asking for. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if there are any podcasts, but now I do. There's tons of podcasts where people are talking about these things.
Sober movements, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Do do you believe, though? I mean, a lot of people who try dry January, right, for multiple reasons, I think they realize how much, if you just let's take one, maybe, I guess, drug, you would say alcohol, right? Yeah. Take one into the mix, it's everywhere, right? So people who try to attempt dry January, think about it. It's at weddings, bridal showers, house parties, restaurants, right? Yeah. And I don't want people to think we're poo-poo-pooing on anybody who maybe has a drink when they're out or whatever.
Right.
But I think that's where people realize, like, wow, this was tougher than I thought.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And then dry January, we talked about right before we sat down. I knew somebody doing damp January. And I'm like, damp January? You're still drinking.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and damp apparently is like you know, the vow is to drink less than you normally would, or to not drink for part of January.
Right.
So yeah,
like somebody told me that. I'm like, you're still drinking. It's not dry January.
Yeah.
In the sober curious movement. What is this?
Yeah. Well, it's basically that. You know, just what it says. People are more curious about the effects of not having alcohol in their system now than they ever were before. People are talking about the negative impacts of alcohol on the brain and body like they never were before. People are sick of being hungover. People are sick of, you know, not feeling like fully themselves again until Tuesday or Wednesday if they went out on Saturday, right? There's these lingering effects where, you know, there's an impact on energy levels, there's an impact on sleep, there's an impact on weight, impact on skin, all of these, you know, potentially negative effects for so many people that it's like, why am I doing this again? I think a lot of people are asking themselves. But to your point before, it is so immersed and so ingrained in our culture, you know, particularly like I'll speak for Northeast Pennsylvania, which I think is one of the biggest binge drinking areas in the state. I think Scranton was seen as, in one report a few years back, but funerals, weddings, you know, meeting with a friend, right? Like going out to dinner.
Especially when people are always like, hey, let's go out for a drink. I feel like I'm a 90-year-old man, so most of the time I'm like, how about I meet you for coffee at like 7 a.m.?
Yeah,
just because I want to go to bed.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, your bedtime's like 5, right?
Yeah, now it's like 7:30. You know, my team knows like after 7, like I'm cooked. But I think coming back to what you said, social media, right? Looking at more, I want to say, fit-fluencers and these people into fitness and health and wellness. And I started going down the rabbit hole. And one of my good friends, I mean, she's a neurologist and a sleep expert, and talking about alcohol's effects on your sleep. And I wasn't a big drinker, like twice a month, but I have a AAA personality that if I'm drinking, even if it was with people in my neighborhood, right? Like I didn't want one, I wanted a few glasses of wine. And then a few glasses of wine turn into, you know, multiple large pizzas, ice cream, and then you're back at the gym. And then it almost developed into like exercise anorexia, right? Where you're like, oh my gosh, I got to go back and work all this off.
Right.
And I started looking at more of the sober, curious movement and people doing dry January. I'm like, you know what? Like, wasn't a big drinker, right? Twice a month here and there. I was like, I'm going to do it. And after 70 plus days, a lot of the stuff you said, cognitively, I'm better. My sleep is better. My partner, Matt, and I just went on a cruise, and everyone's like, how's the drinks? And I'm like, I'm hitting club and diet soda like every day. It was great.
Yeah.
Because coming back to, I think, what people even say now as they get older, like, oh, I don't recover like I used to. You're right. Like, you have one wild night when you're in your 40s on a Saturday. It's till Wednesday till you feel like yourself, right? And
Absolutely.
I think I just got to the point where, you know, it wasn't that bad, but just being like, man, I want to get up at 5 a.m. on a Sunday, and I want to go work out, because for me, the mental health component of fitness, right?
Absolutely.
It's phenomenal. And I think coming back to what you said, you put on 35 pounds when you were boozing, right?
Actually, more like 50.
Right? You're eating everything that's not nailed down, which I think happens to a lot of people when they do drink, because your inhibitions are gone. And
it's
you're
a part of it. Inhibition gone. Even the day after. Think about when you're hungover.
All you want is the grease, the food. How has exercise, though, changed your life in recovery? Because I see you now, and obviously I know how passionate you are. And to see a guy and to listen to your story, even though I've known you for like a decade, and to hear where you've been and to see where you are is super inspiring. Because I also know not only are you a gym rat, right? But here's a guy running marathons for charity. I've seen you multiple times in the New York City Marathon.
Yeah, yeah.
What's the impact that has helped you to stay clean? Exercise.
Huge. Absolutely huge. I would say that the two biggest components for me were social and exercise. Social, people that I met in AA, sober friends that I gained over the years. But exercise, when I talked about my early days of drinking and wanting confidence and, wanting something to cope with anxiety, things like that. I mean, exercise, that's what it is for me. Like I preach that more than anything.
That's why I felt like I always get you, right?
Yeah,
Because I go to for me, the gym is not just to, I want to build the dream body or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I think we're all working toward that every day, right?
Sure.
But it's the mental health and it's the anxiety. Maybe you wake up and you're like, God, I got this going on. I got this project, this client meeting. And you go to the gym and you walk out and you're like, okay, I got this.
I say to people, I do it for this.
Yeah.
And before I came up here today, I ran 4.5 miles because I knew that I would be better had I run a few miles than not. Now, what's nice is, I think I've had periods where I was like maybe a little bit more obsessive about it. It's leveled out where I do feel like it's important to have a healthy outlook on it, a healthy relationship with exercise and food and, being careful not to go too far with like it being a constant, have to do this, have to do that. And so I feel like I'm in a really good place with it right now. But yeah, the feeling that I get after a good workout and, how I feel after a week of working out, but also taking care of my body, sleep, nutrition, water. It's like, there's no comparison.
And coming back to what you said, because you're involved in a lot of community stuff, and I know you have a big family and you're always out doing stuff in northeastern Pennsylvania. And you talked about how alcohol, for one, right, it's ingrained in everything, right? It's at the after events from a funeral. I want to say the repast, right?
Yep.
It's at house parties, restaurants. So how does somebody who's been sober for years now, since 2011, how do you navigate that when you're out? Because you're still out in the community, you're still out with your friends, you're recently married.
Yep.
How do you handle that when people are like, hey, you want a drink? And they don't know your backstory? Because I'm sure a lot of people struggle with that, right? People feel the guilt like, oh my gosh, I better have a drink, got to be part of the party.
Yeah. It's funny.
How do you do it?
It's funny. And interestingly, we didn't get too far into the movement and the mocktail movement lately, but I would say that things like mocktails are actually very helpful for this sort of situation because there's a level of discomfort there. Even like I haven't drank since 2010. I'm pretty comfortable in my own skin being around it, but there's still that little like, I'm the guy that's not drinking.
Can you be at a bar with friends and not have a drink?
I can. Yeah. I was just at one Friday night and I noticed I saw multiple NA beers around me, probably like more NA beers than I've seen.
In case people are like, what's that non-alcoholic
beer? Yeah. So like I'm seeing anecdotally these trends happening. But it's a little bit uncomfortable. And when you first stop, like when you're a couple months in, I didn't go out for probably 8 months when I first got sober. I didn't go to any bars. Like I would go out to eat with sober people. I would hang out with sober friends. I felt very safe in that atmosphere, but I just wasn't ready to, and it's like, why put yourself through that if you're not ready to do it? But eventually, yeah, I'd say on some level, you got to go to some weddings. And trips are another big one, vacations, right? Like you go into an airport, this is where it could be 7 a.m. and, people are drinking vodkas, people are drinking beers, martinis, whatever. So with traveling, there's like this sort of, almost like a Neverland type feel where alcohol is extremely glorified.
Gosh, I've been there back in the day in my 20s, right? Oh, it's 7 a.m. Hey, they're having drinks. Okay, right. Why not? I'm on vacation.
Exactly. Yeah. So traveling is one that could still be a little bit challenging, but it's like it's very the way that addiction was ingrained in me at one point, sobriety is ingrained in me at this point. You talk about things like the gym, you talk about things like anything kind of negatively impacting your ability to perform or just live or be at peace with yourself. Like I view it like I'm going to feel the same tomorrow morning that I felt this morning when I woke up. Like, I thrive on that consistency of just, being rested, having energy, having clarity. And so it's not as tempting for me as it once was. To other people, I would say always have an exit strategy, always be in control of your destiny, have a car, have a way to get out. Let somebody know, don't go into, say, a wedding if you're on the fence and you haven't been drinking. Like, let people in your support group know, whether they're sober or not sober people, but they know your story.
Because I think that's so important. What you hit on is the support you surround yourself with is what's going to help lead to the success of your sobriety.
Absolutely.
So if you're still hanging out with the, quote, bad crowd,
Sure.
the old behaviors can continue.
Yeah. And there's no accountability there. Like when you talk about the glorification of alcohol, people miss when somebody leaves the circle and gets sober, because like, what's one of the things that's enjoyable about drinking? It's drinking with your friends, drinking with, other people that like to drink. And so there's a real, it's interesting. There's like a real loss that can happen, where, sometimes if someone's drinking, they may actually not want somebody else to stop or to even dial back, because that impedes their time.
The last thing I want to get to, how long, 8 years now as a mental health therapist, right?
Yeah.
Specializing in addiction.
Yep.
What's one of the best success stories that just stays with you and sort of comes back to that talk in your head saying, this is what I do. Not only because of your own recovery journey, but what's a story that stands out that you're like, wow.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many, there's so many. And I don't want to,
And are you seeing younger people coming into rehab and into
I have
therapy sessions? Okay.
Yeah, I have. I'll see young adults, and some adolescents, but mostly 18 and up. But I had someone that I connected with very well years ago. They came into one of the treatment centers I was working in, and they had there was a recent suicide of a loved one of theirs. There was stuff going on with their children. They were unemployed, and they were a heroin user. And this was somebody that, by all accounts, your first thought is no chance. No chance that they're able to overcome the grief, the stress, the lack of employment, these hoops that they have to jump through. There may have been some legal stuff to handle too. And they did it. And they were an incredible person, still are, and, very charismatic, did it with grace. And it was just, for all of the challenges and, all of the sad stories that you see, it really is like, it's chilling when somebody turns it around. And really, in a way, it's like everybody is the miracle in a way, because if you're living a lifestyle where it gets to the point that, you have to seek treatment to change this highly addictive behavior, and if you can change that and walk away from it, not go back, like it's incredible, because at one point in your mind, this was everything you thought about. This was all you cared about. So to be able to get away from that, it's just, it deserves all the credit in the world.
And before we wrap, are there anything you want people to know regarding the latest treatment with addiction, the help that's out there that is sort of more 2024 versus what you experienced in 2011 to help people get their lives back?
It's a good question. And a good point. I would say that it is just so much more common now. It was always common, but what's different is people weren't talking about it.
I don't think people were talking about mental health until the pandemic hit.
Right.
And the importance
Exactly.
of seeing somebody, getting help, maybe using some type of medication,
Sure.
right, to help if it was
Sure.
overwhelming anxiety, et cetera. But
Yeah.
like you said, I think people are more in tune to it and people are talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, stigma's been mentioned. There's even an internal stigma where it's hard to admit to yourself that, you know, you might benefit from help. You might, you know, need help. But I mean, you do it and you get to that other side and you start to work through it, and it's just, it can't be defined. It's just so worth it. You know, like that weight that people carry because they're afraid to say something, because they're, you know, nervous about potentially being judged. Maybe they're afraid of losing something. It's just not worth it. You know, like life is so precious. If you're thinking about asking for help, do it. You know, do it. Whether that's, you know, somebody that is a friend or a family member that has experience, or even just jumping online, you know, getting to the Help Now number. You know, there are a lot of resources in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of resources in the country. There's a lot of resources in Northeast Pennsylvania.
And we'll put some of those in the podcast description.
Yes,
super
absolutely.
helpful stuff. Well, hey, I mean, for somebody I've known you, as I mentioned before, a decade, right, through the gym circuit, to hear your story, to see where you were and how you leveled up to where you're going is like super incredible.
Leckey, I appreciate it, buddy.
Recently
Thank
married, like living your life. And as I
Yep.
said, every time I log onto my own social, I'm like, oh my God, the guy ran another marathon for charity, like just to see where you've been and where you're heading. And I think there's just so much ahead. So thanks. This was eye-opening.
Well, hey, and people like you were always an inspiration to me. You know,
Thanks.
Seriously,
I appreciate
you know, coming in and being at the gym and seeing the way that you went at life, seeing the way that you worked out, seeing what you've done for charity and the different events you put on, and just the type, you know, and I think that's another thing you get a lot at the gym or working out, or just being amongst people that are hungry for more, you know, and that wears off on me. And so I appreciate you. Thank you.
And if people are so inspired, which I know they will be, hearing your story and they want to connect with you, I know you're on LinkedIn, but are you comfortable sharing where you work?
Yeah, absolutely. Integrative Counseling Services. And
that's in
Scranton,
Pennsylvania.
downtown
All right.
Scranton.
Good stuff. All right. Because, you know, sometimes people hear someone's story and they're like, I feel like that guy gets me.
Look me up.
All right.
Pat McDonough.
All right. Good stuff. Thanks so much, Pat. Really appreciate it. Eye-opening stuff. A lot of great resources we'll put in the comment section, the summary of this podcast. And I really appreciate you for being a part of another episode of The Ryan Leckey Show. See you next time.
Here we go, buddy.